So welcome to Lightning Talks with the Center for Social Change. Once a month, we bring our members together to do quick pitches to each other. They're usually just a few minutes, 2-3 minutes, and then members can ask questions. It's a way for our members to practice their pitch, to get to know each other, and to enhance collaboration. And it's a quick break from work. So when we're at the office, we normally have a little cafecito at 3:05, but today, since we're online, hopefully you have your own coffee if you want that. Today, Lupe had a great idea. Last time, she asked the speakers to nominate the next speaker. So at the end of this call, we'll do the same for you guys. But all the speakers last time nominated Miami Waterkeeper, CLEO, and SECORE. And I think what that came from was a curiosity from people about the effects of the quarantine on the environment. So Lupe had the idea. All of you have done lightning talks with us before. We've already had your pitches. So to ask you guys to do 5 minutes, up to 5 minutes, it's okay if it's less, about what you've seen as the environmental impacts. I think we've all seen those videos going around of animals, more animals in the environment, and all different sorts of things. And people are curious, like, you know, what is the impact that the organizations that do this every day of the year are actually seeing? What are the real impacts? So what we're going to do is I'll set a timer for 5 minutes. And I'll give you a little wave when you're down to 1 minute, and then you can wrap it up. And then people can ask questions for 2 minutes, and we'll do that in order. And we'll start with the CLEO Institute. Does anybody have any questions about that before we start? Okay, so I'm gonna get the timer up here, and you're unmuted, so you're ready to go. Okay. And ready.
Hi, everyone. My name is Natalie. I'm a program manager at the CLEO Institute. It's so great to see your faces. You all have been missed. I hope that you're all well and safe. So what I'm going to do is kind of bring you up to speed, what we've seen kind of like on a global scale since quarantine, and then bring it back down to Miami, and then talk a little bit about what we've been doing working from home. So as we practice quarantine, we definitely have seen a reduction in driving, flying, industrial activity, and COVID-19 has caused greenhouse gas emissions to drop. What does that look like? So for example, in China, coal use has fallen by 40%. China is the #1 emitter of greenhouse gases, and emissions have fallen 25%. India, the second largest emitter, their CO2 emissions have fallen for the first time in 40 years. So what's going on at home? Electricity use in the US has declined slightly, but gasoline sales have dropped big time. So you guys, we obviously haven't been driving to work or driving to different places. So there's different reasons that emissions have dropped. So when we look at transportation, for example, in the US, transportation sector generates the largest share of greenhouse gas emissions. So in countries that are practicing social distancing and practicing those public health measures, they're driving less, they're flying less. And so that is causing the air pollution and the emissions to go down and the air to clear up. So for example, this has been a relief for kind of those smog choked cities around the world. For example, in New York, where in March, researchers at Columbia calculated that the carbon monoxide emissions from cars have dropped by 50%. So air pollution is clearing up locally. And this is a big deal because a study came out from Harvard that suggested that there's an association with higher air pollution levels and higher COVID-19 death rates. So we're starting to see that intersection of climate change and health. In Miami, the beaches and marinas have been closed for about 6 weeks. So samples collected from the Miami Waterkeeper show that there's low bacteria levels in local bodies of water, especially in the Miami River. So I'm sure they're going to elaborate about that. The Florida Department of Health also shows similar findings all the way from Key Biscayne to Hollywood Beach. However, just because air pollution is dropping doesn't necessarily mean that we're making progress in mitigating climate change in the long term. There's a possibility that as the pandemic subsides, emissions might soar again as countries kind of start to kick off their economies. Our current administration has reversed nearly 100 environmental rules that were put in place to combat pollution and climate change. So while COVID-19 was unfolding, the EPA relaxed environmental regulations in the auto industry, for example, and there's a fear that other countries might follow suit. So at CLEO, we don't see this as an opportunity to follow suit. Rather, we see it as an opportunity to consider, what changes have we made in our personal lives? And can this new normal incentivize not only new personal habits, but also an investment in renewable energy? Right now there's oil tankers floating in the ocean with destinations unknown. There's gasoline with nowhere to go. So we consider, if we had a more robust renewable energy sector, a decarbonized energy market, potentially we could have mitigated some of the problems that we're facing today. So we actually, we imagine it as an opportunity for the renewable energy sector to bounce back stronger than ever. And, no one would have wanted emissions to be lowered in this way. But if anything, it's shown that our communities are able to look out for each other. And that's a very valuable lesson when it comes to tackling climate change. And I did have one kind of, this isn't a fun fact necessarily because it's kind of a bummer, but I had a surprising fact that I wanted to share, which is that this is not the first time that a pandemic has left a mark on atmospheric carbon dioxide levels. Throughout history, the spread of disease has been linked to lower emissions. For example, in the 14th century with the Black Death in Europe, and in the 16th century with smallpox. So not like fun, but interesting.
Awesome, there's the time. That fact was not necessarily happy, but your presentation was awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. That was a nice overview. I definitely have some questions, but let's see if anybody else has questions first. Go ahead and just unmute yourself if you have a question. Okay, well, I'll ask my question first. You mentioned the pollution, that you're noticing a correlation, I think, between the cities where the pollution is higher and the COVID deaths. Is it possible that that's just because those are cities that are more populated, or is there a link established between the actual, or a causal link between the pollution and the deaths?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I'm happy that you used the word causal, because in science, the way that it works is you have to have like a statistically significant correlation. And that is what the evidence suggests. Outside of population per se, air pollution seems, when there's higher air pollution, there does seem to be a statistically significant correlation with higher death rates.
Interesting. Very interesting. Any other questions there? Okay, well, I'll ask another question. I have so many questions. So what do you think is the best thing for us to do moving forward? I mean, I'm sure there's like a million things we could do, but like the number one thing that we could do to make sure that we continue moving forward with good climate change. I mean, you know what I mean.
By taking the number one thing we can do to take climate action, is that kind of what you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. I think the number one thing we can do is to stay civically engaged. We have our candidates for mayor of Miami-Dade County coming up soon, the election. So paying attention to local elections as well as national elections coming up in November, making sure that you're secure to vote by mail, because we don't know what it's going to look like, coming to vote in November. But you know, when we exercise our vote, we help to put in place politicians who can advocate for those kind of climate policies that we want to see to ensure that we're, you know, safeguarding our air, water, and land. And I hope that by now people understand how intrinsically linked those are with our health. And the best way to safeguard it is by, you know, putting in place individuals who are going to advocate for those policies.
Okay. Awesome. Any other questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to make one last note. Sure. That at CLEO we've been taking all our work online. So we've had record-breaking amounts of people participating in our programs. And so that has been, even though transferring the programs online has been challenging, I find that a lot of people have been reinvigorated to take more serious steps in building their capacities to take climate action. So I'm looking forward to hearing what other organizations have to say about their work in the community.
Great. I'm very glad to hear that you guys are having higher participation in the classes. So now we are going to go to Collin with Miami Waterkeeper. If you are ready, let me switch the spotlight over to you. All right, we're ready. Thank you.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me on today and showing interest in what's going on in the environment locally in Miami-Dade and Broward County. So just a little rewind here. So when COVID-19 first had its big impact on Miami, which was around March 11th, Miami Waterkeeper had to immediately halt all of our water quality monitoring, which is our weekly, every Monday we go out and test bacteria levels at local recreational sites and beaches across Miami. And we do that in tandem with the Florida Department of Health. And actually the Florida Department of Health and Miami Waterkeeper both suspended all their sampling at around March 11th, March 12th. And so throughout March 12th up until around end of April, there was actually no water quality results being taken. So it's really hard for us to kind of make really sound scientific calls on like the actual water quality and seeing if it's like increased or decreased based on the lack of you know, people in the water and lack of boat traffic and things like that. But what we could see and what we were seeing throughout the month of April was that the water was visibly clearer and bluer, and it seemed more pristine even without people on the beach. If you just look at the water, it seemed to be you can see a lot more things. And so with this, it all kind of came into focus with some new initiatives and campaigns that Miami Waterkeeper decided that we saw the importance of it. So we actually started receiving more pollution reports. That was the first thing that started happening at our organization. And these pollution reports started coming in all over Miami. And then we think it's because people started spending more time at home. And so as people spend more time at home and they're working from home, they're maybe taking walks around their neighborhood that they hadn't done before. And people are more vigilant and kind of making observations around the waterways and around their neighborhoods about pollution issues that they were obscure before. And so we've had multiple different oil spill reports to us. We've had different kinds of fishing gear that people have been reporting to us that now, because the water is so clear, they can actually see this, you know, debris and large things underneath the ocean that need to be cleared out by the Department of Environmental Protection and other departments that we're working with. So with this, the campaign started with the whole, if you're going out in the environment, if you're going out and walking around, be vigilant and keep your eyes on the water, not only just for pollution incidents and pollution reporting, because Miami Waterkeeper is still taking in those reports and making sure it's solved, but also since people have been out there, they've actually been sending us videos and photos of all these like really, some of them rare and others just protected species around Miami-Dade County. So for example, the small-tooth sawfish, we've been seeing reports not only in Miami-Dade, but I also saw some reports up north in a different county. I forgot the county name, but small-tooth sawfish are very rare. They're extremely endangered. There's actual individual departments and teams that are having these research projects at NOAA and other Fish and Wildlife Commission, things like that, that are studying these movements of these animals because they never come out. They really are hard to study and find out where they mate, where they kind of use for habitat. And so the other day when we received an image and a video of two small-tooth sawfish actually in Biscayne Bay, they were both swimming together. It's actually the first time ever they ever recorded two small-tooth sawfish in Biscayne Bay. So this maybe doesn't seem like very important. Maybe it's just like, oh wow, what a cool coincidence. But we were actually able to send this report of these sightings into NOAA, and they were actually able to put that data into a recent publication. And those publications and those research journals actually go into making management plans for individual species. So that video or these individual pictures people have been sending in of protected species and endangered species actually might contribute to the future protection of these animals. And so that's really exciting for us. And we think that these animals, like the small-tooth sawfish that are generally more shy and they don't really come out often when it's like a really crowded beaches, a lot of boat traffic, we think that because of COVID-19, a lot of these animals are coming out of hiding, they're coming into the shores, and since the water is also clearer, we're able to see them and observe them, and people are having their eyes in the water, they're sitting at home looking out their windows, and a lot of our reports have actually been coming from people who are just sitting in their apartment buildings down in Brickell or other areas across Miami, which is really exciting. It's something that you don't really have when you're busy driving from work into your office and being at your office and driving home. People are really focusing in on their environments and their neighborhoods and the ecosystems that surround them. So two big campaigns that started during this whole COVID-19 situation has been, one, reporting pollution that you see, even if you're unsure. We've had reports come in like, I don't know if this is actually a pollution issue, and it actually turned out to be a construction violation. So people are becoming more aware and becoming more adamant of reporting things, which is awesome, as well as the See a Fish, Send a Fish campaign, which is how we're asking people if they see an endangered species or just protected species that they report it to us, because we know exactly which departments, which researchers in different kind of groups who study these specific animals, and we can get them that data in those pinpoints and whatever else we get sent to us. And so regarding the whole water quality issue and how we've been seeing, water bacteria spikes actually decrease, that was due, we think, to just the fact that we weren't sampling a lot. And so we want to think that because there's less people on the beaches and less boat traffic, less sediment getting stirred up, we think that that's actually contributing to the better water quality per se. But also we had a big drought in late March and most of April, where we didn't have a lot of rain coming into Miami, which means we don't have all the runoff, all the pollution, all the water that runs through the streets and the storm drains. That actually decreased a lot at the exact same time as the COVID-19 pandemic, once everything started shutting down. So we like to think that the multi-factored approach to the whole increased water quality wasn't just the fact that there was no people on the beaches or boating, but it was also because of the drought, which is also a good thing, because what CLEO said, there has been less traffic, less cars, less things like that, and so that means less pollution coming from the actual tires or people moving around on the streets and things like that. So when it does rain, it's actually maybe less pollution getting run off into our waterways, especially now as we see rain starting to pick up. But yeah, so those are some of the updates for that, and some of the other programming that Miami Waterkeeper has shifted onto, besides the See a Fish, Send a Fish, and reporting all the different pollution issues that people are now reporting more often. We've actually went from maybe 1 or 2 reports every couple weeks to about 3 a week. So that's a really big increase in people reporting and being more vigilant. But we've also moved all of our trainings and trying to move them online. And so around World Oceans Day, which is June 8th, we'll be setting out some brand new trainings and online learning activities for adults and children.
Great, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Very interesting, and I was definitely checking the Swim Guide app frequently during this time to see if there were any updates. So anyway,
to answer that though, so Swim Guide right now is in special status. That's not really what we can control because of the beach closures. But if you want, we've actually, all of our data that we've been acquiring the last couple of weeks and been back out monitoring, you can actually go to our website now, and we have historical data that shows the updated, most recent test results that maybe aren't shown directly on Swim Guide.
Great. Okay, well, thank you. So if you want to post in the chat any of the links to those programs like where people can report or see a fish, send a fish, that would be cool. And we can link to those. Does anybody have any questions for Collin or Miami Waterkeeper? Okay. I was wondering when you were, I was looking at my questions, when you were talking about the, how you're able to see more of the fish that were harder to study and things like that. I don't know if this is even feasible, but, or if it would help, but to have, you know, would it help if there was, I don't know, one day a month or something that we said no boating or no, you know, if we just close down the water. I mean, I don't even know how that works. For one day a month to give a chance for these animals to come out so they can be researched. Would that help?
You know, in an ideal world, maybe, but it's never a guarantee. And having to shut down Miami and the boaters is just something I don't think it's feasible. But I think just seeing these animals out now and seeing that that nature is able to rebound and kind of come out, and that it's still here, it's still being resilient even with us on the water. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of times we'll go months and long periods of time without even seeing a small-tooth sawfish at all, mm-hmm. anywhere. And then all of a sudden now, when it's a lot quieter, we're not only just seeing one here and there, we're seeing pairs, which is really important information for breeding patterns and breeding habitats. And so this could actually, having this moment is just like a silver lining. It's like an experiment we could have never done in the real world just because it's not really possible economically. But it's great to see that, you know, they're still here and they're still, you know, actively having social patterns, and their ecosystems are still Biscayne Bay, which means that it might be further protections for the bay in the future.
Great.
I have a question. So it sounds like you've also experienced, you know, more people engaging and reporting. So I'm wondering, how does that make you feel, and how does it shape your lens for like the new normal coming up?
I kind of enjoy having all these new reporters, and like a lot of the, our signature program, 1000 Eyes on the Water, is when we train people to observe their surroundings and report to us. But a lot of these pollution reports that are coming in are actually people who have never attended any of our trainings, which just makes me curious that how all of a sudden they get into their head to report this and send it to Miami Waterkeeper. And I'm really excited moving on to the future, because as we know, like just because the world stops and no one's moving around, that doesn't mean that pollution stops, and industrial pollution specifically, and oil spills and marinas, they're still actively doing things that could harm the environment, especially construction and sedimentation. So moving forward, that's why we're trying to develop new training modules. That's almost like an online e-learning where we can train more people in the public, because they've reached out to us on social media, which means that we could reach them with the training protocol, which hopefully we want more pollution reports. We want to have more of this coming in, because we know that's everywhere in Miami. We know that we just don't have enough people on our team to actually know where it's coming from. And so it's actually a happy thing, I guess, when you see people reporting more pollution, because it's not that there's an increase in pollution. It's just the fact that people are being more vigilant, which we really want to capitalize on. And even when people aren't at home anymore, I still want to make sure that we're getting home the message that, you know, reporting these incidents and being vigilant for these types of things is important, and that if something doesn't seem right, then it needs to be reported. I hope that answered your question.
Awesome. Thank you, Collin. Any other questions for him? Okay. Okay. So let's go to Margaret Miller from CCORE.
Hey.
Spotlight you.
All right. Oh, goodness. Yeah, thanks everyone. That was, I think it was super helpful to hear those other two talks first. CCORE has a little bit more of a niche mission, maybe we would call it. So we're focused on coral restoration and kind of R&D activities for coral restoration, and specifically coral breeding techniques. So we kind of think of ourselves as coral midwives, and developing practices and means to scale up the production of corals through breeding. And we have a capacity building program as well that kind of goes along with that. but our operations are primarily throughout the Caribbean. We have teams and partners that are working in different countries throughout the Caribbean. So our situation, our organization, and our goals have been affected both because much more of our activities and field activities are really dependent on international travel, which we've kind of had reflected as a much bigger hindrance now, and looking into the future as a much bigger hindrance for, you know, the way that we've set up to make progress on things and to make progress on individual spawning events that are going on in different locations. So we've done a lot of reevaluating our plans for the coming year. The other aspect of our work is that corals are some of the less resilient animals that live in the ocean. And throughout the Caribbean, especially here in Florida, the corals have really, you know, are down in such a big hole that although there may be indeed some very small benefits from the reduced activities that we've been hearing about, you know, the direct local activities, a lot of the, you know, the root problems that have put coral populations in such bad shape, you know, are probably not affected. You know, like Natalie said, the transportation sector is really, I think, the one that's really been, you know, drawn back during this time of quarantine. But, you know, all the animal farms are still putting out, you know, sewage and CO2, and all the, you know, the sewage and all the other, you know, activities that are just society have not necessarily changed. So I think there's still a large challenge there. And as far as corals go, I think the maybe very small benefit from any reduced local activity, I'm afraid from our perspective, is much more offset with less that we're going to be able to work with this summer. So we've organizationally sort of reorganized to try to have all of our teams sort of just working with their own team in their own backyard, so to speak. So we have 2 staff in Curacao, and they're trying to figure out how to do all the work we had laid out for Curacao with 2 people instead of the, you know, 10 or 12 that we maybe would have had coming through there to work and help during this very intensive season that we have, while the corals are spawning and while the babies are babies and we're trying to raise those up. So, so that's kind of the challenge and how we've been dealing with it. We're fortunate and thankful we actually do have a project funded here in South Florida this year. So we will be collecting baby corals in August. There's actually a small chance there may be some baby corals born this weekend and early in next week. So we've been scrambling around. We've got some partners down in the Keys that are going to be that can still actually have a boat in the water that they'll be going out and at least monitoring that with us or for us early next week. So there's a very small chance we may have a few babies next week. But Miles and I are really working with some of our local partners here to get geared up to see if we'll hopefully be successful in raising some baby corals here in Miami in August. So as I said, kind of really reoriented to being able to work in our own backyard, which we'll do as well as we can, but it is a substantial hindrance, and it does mean a lot of our planned like big research projects and stuff will probably be put off until, and we have to put them off for a whole year. So it is that'll be a big hindrance. And given the poor condition of corals, you know, we sort of feel like every year is very costly in terms of things tend to get worse and not better. So that's pretty much what I had to say. So Valerie, if you have a question.
Okay, thanks. Oh, I was just telling you have 1 minute left. Was there anything
else? That was my one case.
Yeah,
so I was right about on track. Yeah, that's pretty much our situation. As I said, we've mostly been dealing with sort of reshuffling and reorienting kind of priorities and scaling back our plans a little bit that we'll be able to do locally. So.
Well, thank you so much. That was very interesting. Yeah, I think we're all eager to sort of find the good news right now, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we can, you know, a little glimmer of good news doesn't mean that we can just like ignore everything else that's happening.
It's such the challenge when you work with corals all the time, because they really have so much more bad news than good news about them. Yeah. And it's a constant struggle to, you know, provide some hope and some good-ish news, but not, you know, representing it as, you know, restoration will solve coral problems, because it won't, right? We have to maintain an ocean environment that's viable for corals, and that's a huge challenge. So yeah, it's a balance that I work with on a daily basis, how not to be too negative about things.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, how do we use the little moments of good news to propel the action that we need to get done rather than to dismiss it? Definitely hard.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'll mention one other thing. So there is a big event. I forget which of the two other speakers mentioned World Oceans Day, but on World Oceans Day as well, I think it's May 6th, is a Saturday. One of our partner coral restoration organizations is putting on a big, it's called Coral Palooza. So there's a big sort of, which they're switching to a virtual online event. So there'll be, you know, organizations with virtual booths and presentation stuff. So they're doing an entirely Zoom sort of festival about corals. So
Cool.
on May 6th, if anyone's interested, I can, you know.
You mean June 6th, right?
May 6th, yeah, June 6th, sorry. Yes, thank you. June
Just
6th, Coral Palooza.
Very cool. I think Olivia had a question for you.
I do. Thanks for giving me more information on what you do, and I love what you do. Can you speak more a little bit about the bleaching event that's happened in the Great Barrier Reef this year? Because I searched high and low, and because of COVID, it just got completely muted in the news.
Yeah, so it's a really good point. So the Australia's Great Barrier Reef, which is the biggest coral reef in the world and probably the best managed, like they probably have the best local management scheme there as well. So in general, it's considered, you know, one of the better off reefs in the world. But they have had the third. So in the coral world, and we're thinking about climate change, we look at these projections about when these coral bleaching events. So when you have a heat wave or when the entry temperatures are a degree or two higher than the corals are used to, they have the stress response where they expel their algae, their symbionts that help feed them. And so essentially when this happens, it's called coral bleaching because they all turn white when these little algae are lost. And they essentially could start starving, and then they tend to get disease. And so when that stress occurs over too long a period of time, you tend to get huge amounts of coral mortality and things that happen, you know, relatively rapidly in the course of weeks or a couple of months during the hot period of the year. So we look forward, or we don't look forward, but we worry about the future when we project that these coral bleaching events, when it gets too hot every year. In the past, you know, maybe it's been every 10 years or every 6 years, or often in the past been associated with El Nino events and these kind of large scale global patterns in climate. But Australia has had now 3 of these major bleaching events in the past 5 years. So how far off of that is from an annual event? Not too far. So it's a huge concern because these bleaching events, these heating events that cause these major disruptions to an entire ecosystem are happening on such a rapid or at a small interval now that we're really approaching that annual interval of these major disturbance events that the models, mind you, don't predict to happen until the 2030s, 2040s, 2060s. So in other words, we're way ahead of the curve in a way that we really don't want to be. In terms of how bad it is, it always will take a little while for, you know, those local surveys and that local data to sort of get compiled. And, you know, well, it's a really good point in terms of the news reports. I think it has been completely subsumed by human concerns. I know that the local researchers and stuff there are definitely, you know, assessing that similar to the way that they did in the, you know, the 14, 15, 16, 17, you know, really earlier, really bad bleaching events. So I'm confident there will be some more scientific assessments coming out in due time in terms of the relative amount of mortality and things like that. And usually a coral bleaching event, it'll take a few months to really get a good idea of how much mortality results, because it is a matter of once the temperatures moderate, a lot of times corals can recover. A lot of times they may recover and then they succumb to disease in the following months. So it's a little bit longer event to have a good picture for what the results actually are with regard to the reef. And so that information I'm sure will be coming out over the next few months.
Awesome. Any other questions? So maybe we can close with just a quick thing from each speaker. Maybe, so I already asked CLEO and Natalie gave me hers, but one thing that that we can do to make an impact. And there's probably many things that we should be doing, but one thing that we can do, us and everybody could do.
I'll say keep engaged on climate change issues, probably the same thing that Talia said. I mean, that's the worst threat to coral reefs. And so the things that need to be done, I mean, personal things that we need to do too, but we really need societal changes, and we need government policies that will help us make those societal changes. So I think that's the most important thing. Continue to be.
All right.
And then I want to re-echo that the whole policy thing, especially because Miami Waterkeeper is involved very heavily on policy and trying to put new ordinances and regulations in place to protect certain species and ecosystems. And there are still a lot coming from DEP and DERM that they're still holding public comment for some of these different, sedimentation rules for dredging, or different kind of permits and environmental permits that are getting reassessed. Those are still, unfortunately, getting moved forward and getting pushed forward. And so they're still accepting public comments. And so just because we can't go in person to give our comments doesn't mean that people shouldn't be engaged and kind of know about that. So if you want to be more engaged about your calls to action and how you can get involved and where you should go to do that, you can go to our website and figure out different campaigns and policy agendas that we have going on currently in the Miami-Dade, Broward County areas.
Is there a particular button or page on your website that lists those ways?
Yeah, you could click on the campaigns.
Okay. And Natalia, do you have any final words you would like to share with us?
I miss you all.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. This was very informative, and I definitely we're definitely going to post this for other people to see, because this is super valuable information. And I wouldn't be surprised if people have more questions and if we ask you to give us more updates in the future.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
Yep,
Thank you guys.
Thanks for sharing, you guys. Thanks for sharing your expertise.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Everyone.
Bye.